So we're going to start with just some simple overviews of some initiatives, some activities, some projects that we've all been involved in that will highlight the importance of natural resources and communities. We're going to start with Meghan Sittler. She's with the Lower Platte River Corridor Alliance, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to her.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. Just a bit of a background on the Corridor Alliance. It was formed just about 20 years ago by the three Lower Platte NRDs, Lower Platte South, Lower Platte North, and Papio, Missouri NRD, as well as 6 state agencies, everything from the university to Health and Human Services to Game and Parks, anyone that has an interest or stake in Nebraska water, and particularly within the management and resources of the Lower Platte River. Again, Lower Platte River is essentially about the last 103 river miles of the Platte River system. And the corridor itself is a rather narrow area. In a sense, we tend to focus primarily on the floodplain, the bluffs, and surrounding areas, but that still encapsulates about 24 communities, and dissects about 8 counties. So within that range of counties, we have Sarpy County, clear on the eastern portion of the state, that has consistently grown at one of the highest rates in the state and in the region, actually, over the last about 20 years, to Butler County, which is the most rural county, and has seen a consistent population decline over the last 50 years, while the remaining 7 have continued to see an increase as both the Omaha metro area grows, other smaller communities continue to grow, bedroom community idea, and that sort of thing. So to get a handle on that growth and the continued impact of the development, as well as potential not growth or changes in land use, even in more of the rural counties, those 9 entities, 20 years ago decided that rather than going a federal designation route, which unfortunately impacts other river systems across the state, they decided to join together to increase collaboration and communication, both importantly among those 9, but then even more importantly out onto the ground with local stakeholders, and local being everything from those cities and counties to other organizations, other agencies, or just individual landowners along the Platte or in the surrounding areas that have the important stake in those resources of the Lower Platte. We've done a number of projects, programs, and efforts over the years, and that continues to ebb and flow as changes in society and changes in how we understand the resources and the management of the resources continues to change. One of the most recent efforts we've done is the Lower Platte River Recreation Master Plan, which was done in partnership actually with Game and Parks and the Army Corps of Engineers. And we did that essentially in a response to what we had seen from one of our outreach events, which is a public kayak tour of the increasing demand for people wanting to use the Platte River as a paddling resource, canoe, kayak, tubing. There's some outfitters that have popped up and that sort of thing, as well as just the traditional impact of Game and Parks properties along there, fisheries and that sort of thing. And so we looked at it as essentially kind of an opening attempt to look at what resources were out there, how we could impact and improve existing recreational access, paddling access, or boat access to the river, or expand that to essentially form a water trail idea. Well, when we did that, and again, going back to those locally led strategies and promoting local input and involvement in things that the NRDs or the state agencies or others are doing, we heard through their comments and through a public opinion survey that we did as well, that we really needed to also back into the communities to make sure that they were better linked to the river system, whether that's looking at a trail town concept. A number of the communities are a mile or 2 off of the river, maybe further, or is that looking at historic trails that are now marked by driving routes, and what that means for those communities and how they really impact their development around recreational infrastructure, so that they're providing not only the services to the recreationists, but once they're there from Omaha or from Missouri or from the Lincoln area, they want to spend some time in the communities, whether that's camping, whether that's visiting a bed and breakfast, whether that's just exploring what that community has, as well as, again, getting them within the Lower Platte to understand the critical resource that it is for the state and for species of concern and for our economy as well. When I mentioned, again, that the population growth that we've seen predominantly within the Lower Platte region, the Lower Platte River associated water provides drinking water to just over 50% of the state's population. And so when you're talking about the impact of just our normal climate variability, to steal W. Don's drought are us line, but then also on this end of the state, floods are us. And trying to understand what the impact of those changing climate, or the impact of the changing climate and the variability and impact of storms, impact of droughts, not only for promoting or providing the resource that's needed if you're developing recreation infrastructure and developing communities to rally around that, but most importantly to continue to provide quality, safe drinking water and enough water for threatened endangered species that call the Platte River home, and continue to have that, that true integrated social and physical landscape.
Great overview. Thanks, Megan. We're going to jump into, oops, too far here. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Tanya Burnett. She's kind of my partner in crime. She's going to talk to you about Climate Masters of Nebraska, and then she'll have her former student, Maddie, give her experience.
I could go sit down over there, but I chose not to, I guess. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our Climate Masters of Nebraska program. We actually learned about this program. They started it at Oregon University, and we found it online, and the nice colleague that I work with on this, she just said, you know what, we should do this. You can be the project coordinator. The money can come to you for your salary. Mine can be matching. Who's going to say no to that, right? So we put in an EPA grant, and we received funding for a year in 2011 to do our first course. Basically, the course is 10 weeks, so we meet 2.5 hours during the evening, usually Thursday nights. And it's basically set up to teach any community member. You don't have to have a science background to take this course, but it teaches community members about climate change, about things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. And a lot of these things save money, and they're also good for the environment. So it's a win-win program. As part of that program, it's free since it's grant funded. As part of it, we expect students to do 30 hours of volunteer time. We've had some really cool projects in the past, all the way from gardening and low flow education, not low flow, I'm thinking now of drought, but like the drip irrigation systems. We had a lady that worked at youth services, and she actually had these teenagers that were in the detention center do a garden and use drip irrigation and learn about saving water. We've had a lot of educational events that we've gone to. We've done litter pickups. We've had people do energy audits. We used to do home consultations. We found that a little cumbersome and a little scary for our volunteers because you're going into someone's house and you're not an expert in that. So we backed off of those and we do other things instead. But this program is expected to help maybe change people a little bit and change their practices so that we have a more sustainable future and environment. And it's really interesting. We've had 3 classes now. The last one was funded through the Department of Environmental Quality here in Lincoln. And it was through a litter reduction grant. So we had to kind of tailor it a little different than the previous 2. And we did the litter pickup with that one. We focused more of our curriculum on litter, waste reduction, and recycling. We left transportation out of that one because most of us understand, you know, if you drive a car that is a gas hog, you're increasing your carbon footprint. And I'm guilty of it. I've been booed by my class. I have a 6'4" husband and 2 small children, so I can't help it. Someday I'll get a smaller car. But we talk about waste reduction, recycling, water conservation. We've done transportation in the past, local foods, and yards. So, and of course, energy reduction. That's a huge, huge issue. Energy and transportation are actually 2 of the biggest sectors that produce greenhouse gases. So our goal was to have 75 people finish the 3 courses. So there were 25 people in each course. We've had 71 people finish, which is good odds. And we've had over 1,500 of volunteer hours done. So it's been an incredible program. We're looking for funding currently. It's kind of hard to just get money to run an education course. And being at UNL and in academia, the academic setting, we tend to do research with outreach tagged on to that. That's a lot of what I do. So we're currently looking for funding and hoping to have a course in Omaha as our next goal. And then we want to go more central Nebraska. So that's kind of a brief introduction to Climate Masters. And then Maddie will talk to you about her experience in the course. Were you in the first one or second? You were second.
I think I was the second.
You were
I
second.
was just going to say that. I think
2012.
I was the guinea pig. It was, I did Climate Masters my senior year of undergrad when I was pursuing my environmental studies degree. And it was like the spring of 2013 or something like that. But yeah, I had a really good time. I remember doing like an education outreach where we went to Earth Wellness Festival, and I taught kids about the water cycle and did like a game called water banking, which was teaching kids about how to use water in a manageable way. Like you tell them that you have a certain amount of water, and like how would each sector use that amount of water. And it was a really neat experience, especially with a background in applied climate science. I really had to apply my knowledge in a way that could be understandable for even kids in like elementary school age, which was a really neat experience. Besides that, I had a lot of memorable times with Climate Masters. We went to visit I think it was like the landfill in Lancaster County, and we went out there in one car, so we carpooled, and we looked at just how much gets thrown away. Like there were like birds everywhere. Like I remember, I remember driving out in a car, and then all of a sudden we felt this bump, and we looked over, and there was like this, like I think it was like this long of a nail that was just a hair away from the tire. And I thought, oh my gosh, we could have been stranded in this like landfill with a bunch of birds, like an Alfred Hitchcock scenario. But thankfully that didn't happen, but it was like a really neat experience. And a lady said that this is the away and the throwaway, and really brought that whole aspect of just like the black hole of, we don't think that much when we toss it in the trash and it's just gone forever. It was just kind of crazy to see it all in like right up in your face. Yeah, I also learned about just this store that's down on like West O that sells like unwanted building materials, and through Climate Masters, and I thought I would check it out, and it inspired me to do like a pallet garden, which is what you see on the slide up there. When I lived in an apartment, I wanted to grow some stuff, and did it. Yeah, I had to, we had a small car, so I actually had somebody who had a truck come and like drive it back to my apartment place and then haul it up the stairs. So I got a lot of weird looks from neighbors. But yeah, and it just learning about my ecological footprint, it made me realize how I use my car a lot. And when I got married, I decided to share a car with my husband. And we both go to I go to school at UNMC, and he goes to work at UNMC, so it ended up working out, but also just made me feel better knowing that I reduced my carbon footprint. So, yep, that's it.
Well, I'm going to talk to you with Lisa about the class that we co-taught Natural Resources 498, and it was funded through an RFI teaching and engagement grant. And before Ashlyn was actually picked to be our community case study, Lisa and I had went up to Ord and did some scoping up in Ord, and we were pretty set on having the class maybe go to Ord at first, but then the way that the schedule and the the student schedules worked out and the need for maybe a focus to help Ashland a little bit closer to home, it kind of steered away from that scope. But we'd like to go back to Ord and maybe have them more involved in kind of hands-on projects related to tourism.
Yeah, Ord or Ogallala, we had also scoped
that's
out
right.
Ogallala and the Sandhills, and they'd wanted us to work with them, but the logistics of it was a little too hard.
Okay. So after going through all that kind of decision-making as professors, we decided on Ashland, and this map right here to your, I'm not even going to try to use that. Sorry. You can see the map here, but we had that made in the School of Natural Resources by one of our map makers. I know that's probably not the most appropriate job title, but he's been there forever. I call him a map maker because that's what he is. He's really cool. Anyway, he went ahead and mapped out some of the points of interest, the housing development areas, some of where the local businesses occurred, along with recreation. And as you can see, Ashland is in just a really prime location along I-80 and Highway 6, smack dab between Lincoln and Omaha, surrounded by just this wealth of beauty, natural resources. It's just amazing, all the potential that this little town has. And they're going to increase in population. I'm not for sure the exact year time frame, but they're bracing themselves for at least 10,000. I think it's at 2,200 right now. So they're thinking that perhaps they're going to increase to about 10,000 folks within like 10 to 15 years because of everyone wanting to move to Lincoln and Omaha and expand out into nature and build big homes. So with all those opportunities present some challenges in terms of maintaining a rural, to have that rural vitality feel. And so Ashland, previous to our class, was selected to be an ECAP community, which is an effort through extension. And they had done some scoping surveys, and with the community response rate, I think there was like 500 responses for the community. The students had a really good, I guess, feel for what the community wants in the future. We also worked with Charlotte Nargis, one of the extension educators here at UNL, to kind of give us an overview of what she had been doing. And so it was a really unique time for our students to come in and take a look at the tourism assets and opportunities, while also considering the natural resources and kind of climatic extremes that are occurring in and around Ashland. And I'm just going to point out the slide here, the drought map slide of 2012. You'll probably remember that year because all of us were experiencing severe drought in the state, and it came on pretty fast in the midsummer, and it was with us for at least a year. And all the dots and stuff that you see on the eastern half are the towns that had decreases in water levels and were facing some water shortage concerns. And I'll just ask real briefly why you think the eastern half experienced the most troubles during the 2012 drought. And it kind of goes back to what Meghan had said. Thank you. Yeah. So no Ogallala aquifer on this eastern half. And so this is something that a lot of the communities, not just in and around Lincoln and Omaha, need to consider in the future. You know, infrastructure needs, where they're going to get their water, how they're going to be sustainable as communities. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jodi.
Good morning. I was a student in Nicole's class last spring, and basically our challenge was to assist Ashland with their tourism development, most specifically ecotourism, but also we wanted to help them define their vision somewhat, maybe expand it as well. One thing I'd like to mention is that because of Ashland's proximity to the Platte River, it's really important that we take into account their natural resources, but the fact that climate change does have an impact on Ashland, and especially if there's a drought, because they are so tied into activities and outdoor experiences. At the beginning of the semester, our class took a fact-finding trip to Ashland, and our goal basically was community outreach. So I'm going to jump down to this part. We did some interviews with gallery owners, local citizens, wine tasting establishments, educators, Chamber of Commerce, and a couple of our students actually went to visit some artist in residence programs outside of Ashland in Omaha and in Nebraska City. Because the art community is so strong in Ashland, we thought this might be a potential possibility for them to look into this. After we did our outreach, we then started our case study. And what that involved was a focus on 7 community capitals, which we had identified as being structurally important to Ashland. And we looked at the weaknesses, the strengths, the possibilities of each capital. And we ended up coming up with a brochure like this that broke down all of the different capitals. And if you could, oh, you did already,
Yep,
okay.
sorry.
I'm only going to touch on a few of the capitals. Most specifically, I'd like to talk about natural, built, and cultural. Obviously with natural, the existing structure is the hike and bike trails, the state parks. There's 3 state parks there, the Platte, and there's lots of hunting and fishing opportunities. The possibilities, weaknesses, is there's no outfitters or guide shop. So a lot of people that come to Ashland from Omaha or Lincoln, they have to bring their own gear, their own kayaks, canoes, and it would be very positive and beneficial for Ashland to have some sort of business like that. So that is kind of how we research the capitals. With built, I don't know if you have all been to Ashland. I'm originally from Omaha, but have lived in Lincoln for the past 18 years. And I would just drive by the Ashland exit for the last 30 years and not even consider stopping, because to me it was just a small town. Really not a lot there. It is culturally vibrant. It has some amazing galleries, wine tasting businesses, wineries. You would be surprised what exists there. Plus, it has a incredible historic cultural district. It has a brand new, well, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Sorry, I'm getting excited about this. I was really impressed with Ashland. Yes, I did, actually. We'll stick with the cultural. The wineries, the galleries, they have stirrup days. But the possibilities promote local history. There is a lot of historic sites. They have at least 20 historic sites in and around Ashland. They have a very strong pioneer history and railroad history, which is something that we discovered that I did not know about. We suggested an art walk, which they just did this past summer.
Although it's been really rainy, as you know, record rains this summer. And so I should mention too that Ashland gets a lot of flooding, which is also a concern that they're actually currently working with. So.
Right, yes. So they did implement one of our suggestions. We also talked about local businesses working together and food co-ops, CSAs, farmers market. Being in Lincoln, we're all used to the summer farmers market. I just assumed there was a strong farmers market in Ashland. What we learned is it's a pickup truck that comes into town, parks on the side, and we see this in Lincoln dotted throughout the city, but that's it. There's nothing else. So that is definitely something that they could work on. If you look at the cultural capital, the built capital, you have the historic downtown. They have a brand new library and community resource center, which is it's incredibly nice. And they also have a very nice middle school, high school, so they have that infrastructure. But what are they lacking? Lodging, restaurants. And if you come from Omaha, Lincoln, or another community, and you want to go to the wineries or the galleries, what do you do after that? There's an ice cream place, and then there's one local restaurant that I don't believe stays open very late at night. You leave. and thus that money goes with you to Omaha or Lincoln or wherever. So we also wanted to suggest, because it is a rural community, using local food in the restaurants, local chef, having the art galleries and the restaurants work together. So just expanding their knowledge. And so that is kind of what we did in class, and then we presented that to the ECAP community members and also the Chamber of Commerce, encouraging them to kind of move forward and see what they could do.
And we got lots of great feedback after the study, and I just talked to the new Economic Development Corporation they just formed and talked to the chair of that committee, and it's their plan to continue to look at this case study for kind of future direction in terms of tourism, especially ecotourism, agritourism, and geotourism, which is all defined in here. And that was discussed at the public meetings as well, just what that means. So I'm pretty encouraged that Ashland will probably do something more down the road. It's just, it takes a lot of different forces. And that's why the community capitals is good, because you can see that the forces are kind of aligned to the assets. And so if you have good assets and you know your assets, you can leverage, you can understand how to leverage certain things, you can understand where some of the gaps, which I like to call opportunities, are. I was always telling the students to be positive, don't call them gaps, don't call them weaknesses, but call them opportunities, because, you know, townspeople they don't want to know what they're deficient in, and they certainly don't want to know it from any outsiders. So, you know, it's really important to stay positive and to kind of always revisit these things. And I believe that there's going to be a tourism subcommittee that will be forming soon. So I'm really encouraged by the progress that the students made and that the town is making. So with that, since Tanya and I are kind of co-facilitating this, we'd like to open it up to a discussion with you all regarding, you know, in your places of work, your communities, how are you going to address climate resiliency? What activities or natural resources, assets do you have going on? And then where do you see the most help? Or where do you see your opportunities being? So do we have any volunteers to kind of start discussing that? Yeah.
I've bought cars and done automobile servicing for decades at Lee Sapp's place in Ashland. Yeah. And when all my buddies started buying electric vehicles, they were always complaining that they couldn't go to Lincoln or Omaha because there's just enough distance between the two cities that at least the Leaf goes dead at the city limits. So I called up Lee about 2 or 3 years ago. I said, my God, Lee, you've got a gold mine here. Put in a charging station, because then people will stop in Ashland, go to Sherry's for ice cream while their car's charging so they can go on to Omaha and vice versa. But it didn't take root. So I'll give that to you. If it works, take credit for it. If it blows up in your face, blame me. And that ties in with, you know, sustainability, climate change, but also tourism and economic development. And if people know that a family is captured there for an hour and a half or 2 hours, then that might stimulate food service.
Anybody else want to give some ideas or initiatives you might be working on?
I think one of the things that communities always miss is that point of the existing buildings. When we talk about the built environment, everybody's always talking about, sustainability, but yet at the same time, communities are always building new buildings and are proud of those new buildings when they've got existing buildings that they can reutilize. And I think that's where communities are missing the point. I think in the bigger ecotourism picture and the bigger conservation picture that, the greenest building is the building that's already built and not the ones that are constructed new. And so if we can get communities to reutilize what they already have, that also helps in the whole bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Part of why we use the capital framework too is because even though we focused on ecotourism, it doesn't exist in a bubble. People don't travel to one place typically and just, for example, go rafting, especially if it's a family. They want to eat, they want to stay overnight, and in terms of buildings, they give a community its flavor. They give it what makes it special and unique from other communities. When communities tend to build all these new buildings and have a strip and look exactly like any other community anywhere else, then they're not as attractive to tourism or anyone else for that matter. So that's part of why we had this more holistic vision in terms of what we were doing.
I'd like to make a comment. Ashland was really good about being somewhat resistant to the big box stores, and they do realize that they need local entrepreneurs. They really wanted to focus on young people coming out of college, but I completely agree with you. It's nice to have a brand new library and resource center, absolutely, but if there isn't this huge infusion of money, you can't afford to do that, so you do need to learn to reinvigorate. And that historical district, they're trying, definitely they are trying. And they need to incorporate it into the fact that they have all these historical sites dotted around town.
They have a really strong library association too, and so the need was to move. And if you visit Ashland before the new library and resource center, the library was in this kind of tiny but beautiful historical building, which they're going to use as a historical museum. They just need to get more kind of funding. They've already kind of started to plan the exhibits, and they've had some donations, but with that being said, the community really wanted that new building to fit into kind of the natural resources theme. And so I went to, well, actually the students were there for the opening day of that community resource center, and the architects came in and kind of explained what they did, and from every color to every stone or whatever kind of matched kind of the natural resources in a historic theme. So it looks new and stuff like that, but it really's got this kind of like abstract kind of connection to the environment, which I think is really cool.
Central Community College is actually participating in the Living Buildings Challenge, and we're, I think, the first in Nebraska to be building a living building in Hastings. And part of that is getting the students involved. And have you guys heard of a living building? No, where it pretty much the building acts as kind of like a plant, where it's taking in the energy from the sun and then producing its own energy source. So everything, there's no energy that's being taken in from an outside source. It's creating, and there's no waste. So it's really exciting, and that's just part of the education too, like getting the students in, and then letting those students go back to the rural communities. Because a lot of the Central Community College, a lot of these students are coming from rural areas. So yes.
I have a question. It's more on the recreation. We recently we need something to put Cumming County, West Point, Nebraska. Basically, we need a chimney rock, or we need a car hands or something to put us on the map to attract visitors and people back for recreation. So we've been recently acquiring about an old gravel pit that's probably 20, 30 acres big, and it's got some farm ground around it. It was giving to the foundation of the guy that owned it, and he appointed 10 people to take this land, and they just acquired it in May off of a rental, and they want to sell it to get money to give scholarships back to the community. So I'm trying to convince them to sell the additional 200 or 150 acres that are attached to it as that for the income, and then I want them to donate the lake either to the NRCS or the state to open up as a public park, as a public recreation area. So I've been working with my local senator. This just started 2 weeks ago, literally. Local senator. I've been visiting with my local game warden to get some information. But I guess how do you get anybody on board to do that? I've already been told no, kind of by the NRCS, because if it's not flood control, which it's literally 10 feet from the Elkhorn River, and it was flooded through all the banks were knocked down, and it ran right through the whole lake. And so they fixed all that when they can finish off dredging it. But how do you get to show somebody that without having them just tell you no right away? They may already know about it, I guess, that they never told me that. But how do I pursue this besides with my legislature and the game the game and parks.
Okay, I'm going to try my best because, I guess I'll use, what's been done on the Lower Platte River, and this is all was done years ago, so before my time within the Lower Platte, but, there's obviously a lot of sand and gravel mining along the Lower Platte, so a number of the state-owned areas, such as Louisville State Lakes, Fremont State Lakes, and scattered about other pieces of other parts, and even now turned over to a private Nebco and Quarry Oaks, which is a nationally rated golf course, where a portion of that was a limestone quarry as well as a sand and gravel pit. That has been, so basically those are examples of where it's been done. So I think that's the first step, is understanding that there are opportunities while there may be barriers. And those were situations where, again, it was either the sand and gravel company and or the landowners making that donation or over to Game and Parks. But also then, I think, as I've understood, there's been that strong partnership idea. If you can find a private entity, in addition to maybe the landowner or whoever still holds the right to the land, as well as maybe talking to an NRD, city or county, so that things are done now in partnerships. When you look at large, like Lake Wanahoo, that was done by Lower Platte North in partnership with the city, in partnership with the county, and now in partnership with Game and Parks and a federal level. I don't know that I have a magic bullet for you, but other than to, again, just focus on the fact that that's not a novel idea. It's been done. It's something that other organizations, other collaborative partnerships have promoted and been able to do. Most of the time, Game and Parks or somebody like that is wary of taking it over because they don't have consistent funds for maintenance and those sorts of things. And so if you can find, a willing party or a collection of those parties to help fund that, even private recreation organizations. We have very good relationships on the Lower Platte with Nebraska Airboat Association, and they're going to help, they have talked to us about helping fund access areas, not just for airboats, but also for canoe and kayaks and what that means for surrounding parks. And so I guess, again, just kind of that coalition building and finding those people that will help throughout the process, not just to say, okay, we'll hand it over, but then filling in the then what questions, which I'm sure you've contemplated.
Can I add to that? Mm-hmm. You're looking at me like, really? You're going to add to that? One of the things I found with anything you do in life, if you can make your city council or whomever realize that there might be an economic benefit to this, you can probably win them over. Everything always goes back to money. I think about climate change and Climate Masters, and whether you believe in climate change or you don't, doing some of these things can help save money, and money always makes sense to people. We all want to save money or put money in places where it's going to benefit us. So if you can find a way to come up with even a simple economic analysis of how it might draw people in, it might benefit your community, that might also be helpful.
One last thing. Have you, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is actually just right now has not been extended from Congress, I'm hoping, and the belief is that it will be extended, but that's a Game and Parks administered program. Those are federal funds that help local communities or local groups of individuals or whoever acquire and maintain public open space. So if you haven't explored that route, that'd be a Game and Parks, I guess just get on their website, they have information about it. And then also encourage your federal representatives to help extend that program.
We have a state park 15 miles from us that gets mowed twice a year, so I'm really concerned about if it is taken by the Game and Parks, is it not going to be maintained like the one that's 15 miles away from us? We have to have our own volunteers go there and mow it because they only mow it once or twice a year. So
Right.
Really run down, and I guess that's what worries us.
Right, and that's where, if you go the Land and Water Conservation Fund route, again, if that becomes alive again, it's Game and Parks funded, but you're not handing over the property necessarily to them. They want, a community involvement or a coalition, and so that's where you need to have that ability, or as Tanya said, really focus on the economic impact that can have, as well as, natural impact with as you mentioned, the connection with the floodplain of the Elkhorn River.
Yeah.
Everybody talked to, like you were mentioning, Ashland with no hotels, putting their houses on Airbnb and HomeAway.
Oh, that's a good
And VRBO. I did that. I have an empty nest at home now. I took my walkout basement. I took my laundry, made it into kitchen, and people go, well, who wants to come to Kearney? Like, you would be surprised. The families who come there have a big backyard. I have a swing set. They go, God, it's great. We bring our kids. They can run around. You don't have anybody have to worry about the traffic. And I mean, what you can charge for that, I only need to book it 5 days a week, and it pays 5 days a month. It pays my mortgage. And I live upstairs. I don't have to pay income on it because I live there. I don't have to pay income tax. And people will just rent out a room. You don't have to, you can still live in your house. People will just say, oh God, there's a room here. And I mean, the people, they take care of the place. My sons go, Mom, aren't you afraid somebody's going to take something? I'm like, no, they leave and nobody was there. They clean up after themselves. The people who use those services, especially in Nebraska, if they're coming to Kearney, Nebraska, you know, they're not coming to party. They're families. They're not coming to trash out a place. They're wanting somewhere to stay. And so so many people say, what's Airbnb? What's VRBO? What's HomeAway? They don't know about those. I'm like, it's the easiest thing I've ever done. And the income. And Airbnb charges nothing for the homeowner.
Yeah.
HomeAway is $300 a year, but I get more bookings through HomeAway. But Airbnb charges the customer. And so a lot of people book through HomeAway because there's no charge for the customer.
It's a
But,
great
but it's
idea.
free. It's free for the user. I mean, if you're putting your house in it, you pay nothing unless people book it.
I think the only issue is, I know in Lincoln, you cannot do that.
Correct. Small
So
towns
it's-
where you own your property.
Right.
Yeah, I'm
You
thinking of
can't-
rural
there's
areas
an
like in
ordinance.
Ashland.
Oh.
Or outside.
That's
And
different.
I live in the county. I'm not in city jurisdiction. But smaller cities don't have some of those
And I know,
restrictions.
we did not bring that up. It's an excellent point.
Yeah, it is, especially in the rural area.
What was the other one you said?
Airbnb and
Airbnb
And HomeAway.
Airbnb.
I've never heard of that.
That's like Airbnb.
Yeah.
Verbo, I do.
Yeah.
It's just more people
Yeah.
Well, one of the ideas that we had, B&B, yeah. One of the,
to compete with the
Yeah.
hotels.
One of the things that we had was a Husker Saturday kind of experience for people that are coming from Omaha to
Yeah.
Lincoln or back to Omaha, that they could stop in Ashland to check out local services and to do certain things. And so I could see even on Husker weekends, you know, some of these rural houses kind of filling up, and, you know, or the Berkshire Hathaway weekend. So I wanted to open up, I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to open up an idea to you about youth and the importance of having youth involved in not just rural community kind of decision making, but also just some of these ecotourism opportunities to get youth outdoors. Because I really feel like kids aren't outdoors enough anymore. And so just some ideas on how to, you know, kind of do projects related to ecotourism or agritourism related to youth. Yeah.
We created a Nature Explore classroom in our community. And I know Nebraska City has, you know, the tree house and the large scale, but we did a small one on a vacant lot up on one of our business districts. And so there's within like 3 blocks, there's 500 kids, there's the school, a Head Start, a couple preschools, daycare and stuff like that. So we chose that area, and we get a lot of people that go up there. So we're using that as a tourism piece too. So.
We can bring up another topic. We have a few minutes, but the other things that the group wants to discuss. In the last session, we had talked about also incorporating a little bit more education from individuals like Meghan and Tanya. You know, I see a real need for climate masters in rural communities. I know the plan is to branch out to Omaha because, you know, there needs to be more activity up in Omaha, but also, you know, how do we get people talking about climate change and climate extremes, and, you know, how are they going to plan for the future with, lower tax bases, how the infrastructure projects and things like that, and maybe not just that, but solar panels and other, mitigation adaptation activities. So any thoughts on reaching that issue?
So I'm new to Nebraska. One of the things we were doing there, and did it die? I'll just speak very loud. Well, it's somewhere there, right? It's a long day. It's tired. As am I. But one of the things. So your prior question, and along with this, is one of the questions I work on is decentralizing produce production. So everyone should grow things like tomatoes and lettuce in our community using greenhouses. One of the activities we've been starting to tackle in Kearney is putting these small aquaponics systems, which is just a combination of an aquarium with plants, into the school system. And then they want to take it home, and that creates more activity and more play that's away from a computer or what have you. And there's no kids that don't like to play with aquariums and watch plants grow because they're feeding fish. And so it's kind of a gateway for them to be doing more community-style gardening. And the nice thing about aquaponics is you can kind of scale it up. And if your family wants a little bit larger one, go ahead and get some really cheap 55-gallon tubs and blah, blah, blah. And so we're doing a lot of that, kind of starting that process, and we're going to be expanding it. Aquaponics isn't a new thing, but the problem is it's not a whole lot of education out there, and people really need to understand how to put it together. Once you put it together, it's very, very easy and low maintenance. But putting it all together can be a bit daunting for families. So something that we're working on, but it has a huge impact, because if we grow our own tomatoes, we're not shipping them any longer. You eliminate all of those costs, those environmental costs to doing that, plus the water costs for where they're growing. We get a lot of our tomatoes from California. It's 90% water. That's a bad idea. Right. I mean, so those are kind of grassroots starts that really impacts a bigger problem. And so kind of tackling it with the kids, getting involved with school systems, I think is fantastic. What science class doesn't have an aquarium laying around that they can put water in and a few goldfish? And so that's kind of some work that we're doing, and I think that has an impact if we continue to build the movement of it, if you will.
So I'm kind of confused as to whether we adjourn at 11 or go to 11:15.
I think it's 11.
Is it 11?
Yeah.
So technically we're out of time, but I don't want to rush you all off. If there's anything else that you
I have no idea.
want to bring up, yep.
Okay, yeah. That's when a new thing starts, yeah.
So we've talked a lot about community resilience and building entrepreneurial opportunities. But do you have examples of individuals who have done that? So not necessarily shifted their whole livelihood into a new winery or new way of life. I'm thinking a lot about Sandhills ranchers or farmers who, when we talk about climate and resiliency, for an individual to be able to do those kind of things. So, like the Schweitzer Ranch in central Nebraska, you heavily relying on ranching and want to stay ranchers, but have recreational opportunities that they've taken advantage of in order to, have a good year even when there's a drought, those kind of things. Are there examples of that in either eastern Nebraska that you're aware of, or programs that are available for people looking into those kind of smaller opportunities? Again, this conference, we talk a lot about those big opportunities, but maybe don't highlight as much of the smaller ones.
I'll take the last part first. I think one resource or examples of that is the Great Plains Ecotourism Coalition, and they have they're not financial resources at this point in time, but essentially educational, learning, lesson learned, swapping, that sort of thing for other businesses throughout the Great Plains, whether they're the Schweitzer Ranch or something out in Montana, eastern Montana. Within I'll just speak to one I know of that's just going that direction right now within the Lower Platte. Is a landowner near on the north side of the Platte River, around Louisville-ish, that actually has just protected the floodplain portion of their grounds, working farm, as well as their bluffs with Nebraska Land Trust easement. And within that easement, they allowed an envelope for public access, recreation, whether that's from the river, or whether hunting or that sort of thing. But then on a piece of that ground, they're promoting and working currently with Louisville and Springfield, as I understand, to promote opportunities for community gardens, niche agriculture, local food opportunities. But that it's you look right across the river at Platte River State Park. It's just down the road from Lead Bridge. There's Mopac Trail, and it's a historic farmstead, and actually one of the historic remnants of one of the first historic villages to pop up along the Platte is on that piece of ground too. So it's boom, boom, boom for that opportunity, and they've with the land trust protected that for their heirs or for whoever may come in and purchase that to really, kind of grow that opportunity.
And I know we're out of time, but I just want to mention, going back to ranching, is some of the most resilient and adaptive people that I've met have been ranchers, especially through our drought program. They're some of the most aggressive drought planning people at an individual level. And so we do have a lot of resources for that on our website, and unique things that they're doing to plan for future droughts, and how they're kind of changing their operations and doing other things. And so I have to give a lot of respect to ranchers and what they've been doing over the years. And so, and USDA SARE has been very good in promoting a lot of that work with them. So with that being said, I think we've concluded our session. I appreciate the opportunity for you, or the chance for you to all come here. I think it's really great that Rural Futures has had some discussions, some talks related to rural America, rural Nebraska, and the environment, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in the future. Thanks.